Perfectionism is a silent weight, one that creeps in unnoticed, slowly tightening its grip. It starts small, perhaps with a tiny desire to be better, to do better. But over time, that harmless aspiration morphs into a constant and unrelenting pressure. What's worse? It's invisible to most. The perfectionist walks around with a smile on their face, but deep inside, they are suffocating, overwhelmed by the invisible burden of their own expectations. Have you ever felt like you were carrying the weight of the world, even though no one else seems to notice? That's the silent weight of perfectionism at work. It's not just about setting high standards, it's about the constant dissatisfaction that comes with them. Every achievement feels fleeting, because the bar is always moving. Perfectionism creates a mental cycle where nothing is ever quite good enough, and that feeling of inadequacy starts to seep into everything. Your work, your relationships, your personal growth, it all becomes overshadowed by a relentless pursuit of an unattainable ideal. The more you accomplish, the heavier the weight becomes. Ironically, the harder you try to meet those high expectations, the further you feel from true satisfaction. It's as though the more you do, the less you are. The real issue is how it erodes your mental health. Perfectionism feeds on anxiety, and before long, the pressure becomes all-consuming. You wake up each day with a sense of dread, feeling like you're never quite ready to face the next task. This cycle of perfectionism and dissatisfaction can lead to burnout, a sense of exhaustion that's hard to shake. The worst part? Most people don't realize this is happening to them. They keep pushing, thinking they just need to do more, but what they really need is to let go of those expectations. Letting go of perfectionism is not about lowering your standards. It's about setting healthy boundaries for yourself and learning to live with the imperfections that make you human. Think about the last time you reached a milestone, only to feel empty afterward. You probably told yourself that you'd feel better once you hit the next target. But did it happen? Or did the sense of emptiness just grow? That's the vicious cycle. Perfectionism convinces you that reaching the next goal will bring fulfillment, but it's always out of reach. Every moment you spend chasing the unattainable ideal, you lose sight of the happiness that's waiting for you in the present. You become so focused on the end that you forget to enjoy the journey. This mental exhaustion, though, doesn't just affect your emotional state. It has a direct impact on your relationships and physical health, as you pour everything into the pursuit, neglecting the things that truly matter. This silent weight doesn't just disappear. You have to actively acknowledge it to free yourself from its grip. But how? How do you begin to unravel the mess of high expectations and constant self-criticism? The answer isn't simple, and it requires vulnerability. The first step is understanding that perfectionism is a lie. It tells you that you're not enough, that you're always lacking. But that's not true. It's time to face the truth that perfectionism is not a source of motivation. It's a silent killer of happiness. Once you accept that, you'll open the door to freedom. Freedom from the heavy expectations that have been holding you back. Now, before you get too comfortable with that realization, let's talk about the next phase of perfectionism's trap, the dangerous pursuit of an ideal that doesn't exist. It's easy to think that striving for this perfect version of yourself will lead to satisfaction, but that's just the illusion. You're not chasing success, you're chasing something that's forever just out of reach. Have you ever asked yourself, why do I never feel like I'm enough? You achieve one goal, but then the next one is already in sight, waiting to be conquered. It's like you're chasing an elusive shadow, constantly running, but never quite catching it. Perfectionism feeds you this lie, that there is an ideal, a standard of success you must meet. And it's an impossible one. But here's the catch, you're not supposed to reach it. The moment you get close, it shifts, just out of your grasp. So you keep running, not realizing that the real trap is the chase itself. When was the last time you felt truly satisfied with your accomplishments? Did you feel a sense of relief, or did the moment feel fleeting, like a burst of light fading before your eyes? That's the nature of perfectionism. It creates a moving target. You set high expectations for yourself, and as soon as you hit one mark, a new, higher one appears. This endless cycle only leads to frustration, because no matter how much you achieve, you never feel like it's enough. The problem isn't that you're not capable, it's that you're chasing a mirage. You're playing a game that was never meant to be won. We all have goals, dreams, and aspirations, but when those goals are rooted in an idealized vision of what success should look like, they become a cage. Have you ever felt that suffocating pressure to meet these standards, whether it's from others or yourself? It's like you're trying to fit yourself into a box that was never made for you. The more you try to conform, the more you lose your sense of self. In this pursuit of an unattainable ideal, you end up sacrificing your peace of mind and happiness. The question is, when will you stop running? Now, let's get real for a moment. How many times have you looked at someone else's life and thought, I should be doing that too? Social media, your colleagues, your friends. Everyone seems to have it together, right? And there you are, comparing yourself to their perfectly curated lives, thinking that their success should be your goal. The truth is, perfectionism thrives on comparison. It tells you that someone else's life is the standard you should measure your own against. But here's the dirty secret. Their perfect life is just a highlight reel. You're chasing an image that isn't even real. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that more is always better, that success is always about bigger, faster, and stronger. But this is where perfectionism betrays you. The closer you get to this ideal, the further you actually feel from happiness. You think, just one more step, and I'll finally be satisfied, but the satisfaction you're craving is always just out of reach. Perfectionism tricks you into believing that the next achievement will fix the emptiness, but in reality, it only deepens it. This ideal isn't something you can catch. It's something that exists to keep you running forever. The worst part? You never really enjoy the journey. You're so caught up in the pursuit of an impossible goal that you forget to appreciate the progress you've already made. Every step forward is met with the thought, I'm not there yet. This way of thinking robs you of the present moment, turning every success into just another stepping stone to a goal that will shift the moment you reach it. So ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped chasing this impossible ideal? What would it feel like to finally let go of the belief that you're not enough until you achieve the perfect version of yourself? Now, if you think that chasing this ideal is harmless, think again. Because the truth is, it's destroying you from the inside. You're not just chasing a goal, you're chasing a lie. And in the process, you're giving up your peace, your joy, and your authenticity. You're going to have to face the fact that the real path to happiness doesn't lie in hitting this unreachable target. It's about letting go of the chase. That's where the true freedom begins. Next, let's dive deeper into something that most people never fully understand. Why perfectionism, even when it feels like success, ends up hurting you more than it helps. It feels incredible, doesn't it? That moment when you accomplish something perfectly. It's like a rush, a fleeting high, a sense of triumph that feels like everything is finally in place. But here's the twist, that joy is only temporary. The moment passes, and suddenly you're left feeling empty. It's as though the happiness you thought you earned is just a mirage, dissipating the instant you try to hold on to it. Why does this happen? Why does perfection, which seems so satisfying, end up feeling like a weight on your chest? Let's face it, we live in a culture that glorifies perfection. Everything we see, on social media, in advertisements, in movies, teaches us that success is all about flawless execution. We internalize this message, believing that perfect performance leads to happiness. But what happens when you can't maintain that perfection? You start to crumble under the pressure, and that good feeling begins to turn into dread. The truth is, perfectionism doesn't reward you, it consumes you. Every achievement becomes just another test, another mountain to climb, with no summit in sight. Do you remember the last time you reached a goal? Was there a sense of relief, or was it immediately followed by the next challenge, bigger and more daunting than before? That's the paradox of perfectionism. It's an endless cycle of highs that are quickly followed by the anxiety of maintaining those highs. It feels good to win, but it hurts when you realize that winning means you now have to maintain that impossible standard. You become addicted to the chase, constantly striving for something that is, in reality, unsustainable. This need to be perfect is rooted in fear, the fear of not being enough. When you tie your worth to your achievements, you're setting yourself up for constant disappointment. Perfectionism feeds this fear, telling you that if you're not perfect, you're not worthy of love, success, or happiness. But what if perfectionism is just an illusion? What if the more you chase it, the further you drift from true fulfillment? It's a cruel cycle, one that feels like you're climbing a ladder that never ends, always striving for the next step, but never feeling truly secure at the top. And then there's the constant pressure to maintain it. Perfectionism doesn't allow for rest. Once you achieve something great, the weight of expectation only grows heavier. You're never allowed to just be. Instead, you're constantly checking yourself, adjusting, worrying that the next mistake will undo everything. You become hypervigilant, constantly afraid of slipping up, of falling from the pedestal you've created for yourself. The paradox here is clear. The pursuit of perfection brings you closer to fear, not freedom. Now think about this. What if you stopped chasing perfection? What if you embraced the imperfections that make you human? The paradox of perfectionism is that, while it promises happiness, it actually traps you in a cycle of stress, anxiety, and discontent. The true joy isn't found in maintaining an impossible standard. It's in letting go of the need to be flawless. It's in finding peace in imperfection, and realizing that the true reward lies not in the chase, but in the freedom to be yourself without the constant need to measure up. Let that sink in. Perfection doesn't make you whole. It only makes you chase after something you can never fully possess. So what's it going to be? Will you continue to chase that fleeting sense of perfection, or will you choose the path that leads to real peace and fulfillment? The choice is yours, but only if you dare to let go. Have you ever felt like you're constantly being watched, judged, or evaluated by everyone around you? That's the fear of judgment, the silent force that keeps us tethered to the impossible standards of perfectionism. The pressure to meet expectations, whether from society, family, or even ourselves, becomes a relentless weight. It's not just about doing well, it's about doing perfectly. And when we don't measure up, it feels like the whole world is looking at us, waiting for us to fail. But what if this judgment isn't as real as it feels? What if we're only shackling ourselves with the fear of it? Let's face it, society loves perfection. We see it everywhere, on Instagram, in movies, in advertisements. The perfect body, the perfect life, the perfect career. These images aren't just ideals, they're expectations. The moment we fall short of these standards, we feel like we've failed. But where does this pressure come from? Who's really setting these rules? Are they even realistic? Or have we become so conditioned to believe that we must meet these expectations that we lose sight of what truly matters? Our own happiness, peace, and authenticity. Here's the dark truth. The fear of judgment isn't just external, it's internal too. We become our own harshest critics. We start measuring every action, every word, every thought against an invisible standard of perfection. The fear of judgment feeds into this endless cycle, making us believe that we are only as valuable as the perfection we can produce. We start to distort our own self-worth, allowing the opinions of others to determine who we are, instead of embracing the truth that we are enough as we are. The more we try to please others, the more we lose ourselves. Do you ever stop to wonder why you feel so anxious about the opinions of others? Why do you care so much about what they think? Maybe it's because we've been taught that acceptance comes from approval. But here's the thing, this chase for approval is exhausting. It's a race you can never win, because the finish line keeps moving. The more you try to conform to external expectations, the more you lose sight of your own voice. The fear of judgment isn't about them, it's about you. It's about your own insecurities, your own doubts, and your own inability to be okay with imperfection. How much of your life is dictated by the need to please others? If you really think about it, how many of your choices, your career, your relationships, your actions, are driven by the fear of judgment? Now ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped seeking approval? What would it look like if you started making decisions based on what you truly wanted, without worrying about what others might think? The fear of judgment holds us back, shackling us to a life of inauthenticity and self-doubt. At the end of the day, judgment is just noise. The real question is, whose approval are you really seeking? Is it the approval of others, or is it the approval of yourself? What if you stopped worrying about how others perceive you and started focusing on how you perceive yourself? This is the heart of perfectionism. It's not about being perfect, it's about being free. Free from the chains of judgment, free from the constant need for external validation. Are you ready to break free? Because the only judgment that truly matters is your own. How much of your self-worth is tied to what you do, rather than who you are? For many, the answer is too much. We live in a world that constantly equates success with value. If you're not achieving something, whether it's a promotion, a personal milestone, or hitting an impossible target, does that make you less worthy as a person? The answer deep down is no. Yet, the world has conditioned us to believe that if we're not achieving, we're failing. And this is where the struggle begins. It's an exhausting battle, isn't it? Every achievement feels like it's not enough. You set one goal, reach it, and then instantly raise the bar. It's a constant cycle of striving, but never really feeling accomplished. And worse, every failure seems to erode your sense of self. The more you attach your value to what you accomplish, the more you risk losing your sense of identity. You begin to believe that if you're not doing enough, you're not good enough. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, is your value really defined by what you achieve? Let's dig into the truth here. What if all the success you've been chasing, the promotions, the accolades, the acknowledgement from others, what if it's not the thing that will bring you peace? What if your worth has always been there, independent of all that? Can you separate who you are from what you've accomplished? The dangerous idea that we must achieve to prove our worth creates an identity built on fragile ground, because success is fleeting, and so is its validation. So why do we let ourselves be trapped in this cycle? Why do we seek constant validation from external sources? Because deep down we fear that without these achievements, we're nothing. It's a fear that runs so deep, we don't even recognize it. But ask yourself, if everything was stripped away, if you didn't have that job, that degree, or that shiny achievement, who would you still be? Are you still valuable, even without all the trophies? Or do you become invisible in your own eyes? The problem with this cycle of achievement is that it's endless. No matter how much you achieve, there will always be more to do, more to accomplish, more to prove. And here's the kicker. At the end of the day, when you look in the mirror, do you even recognize the person staring back at you? Or have you become someone who only exists through the lens of their accomplishments? What happens when you're no longer achieving? Are you still worthy? Or do you lose your sense of self entirely? The real challenge here is to break free from this attachment to achievement. To realize that your worth isn't something that can be measured by external success. Your value is intrinsic, inherent in who you are as a person. If you could truly understand this, would you still feel the need to prove yourself all the time? The next time you fall short of a goal, ask yourself, does this make me less of a person? If you can answer no, you're on your way to finding the freedom you've been seeking all along. How many times have you stopped yourself from even trying because of the fear of failure? Have you ever thought, what if I fail? And let that question be the reason you didn't take action. The fear of failure is a heavy chain, locking us in a cage where comfort and safety become our only friends, even if they feel like enemies in disguise. And yet, failure is the one thing that could teach us the most, the thing we avoid most, yet the thing we need the most. Why do we run from it? Why does it feel so suffocating? Failure, in its essence, is often not the end. It's a beginning, a lesson, and a step toward mastery. But why do we make it the enemy? Why do we fear it more than anything else? When did failure become so shameful? It's almost as if we've been conditioned to think that any misstep makes us unworthy, broken, incapable. But let me ask you, has every successful person you admire never failed? Has their path been flawless, or have they walked through fire and emerged stronger? Failure, in truth, doesn't define you unless you allow it to. Think about the times you failed. What did you learn? What insights did you gain about yourself and your approach? The problem is, when we fear failure, we stop allowing ourselves to grow. We halt progress before it even starts. The perfectionist mindset tells us that failing means we are flawed, but does it really? What if failing simply means you tried, you risked, and you learned? What if the greatest achievements are buried beneath the rubble of failure? Consider this. The longer we avoid failure, the longer we stay stuck. The more we fear it, the more power it has over us. Every time you hesitate, you feed into that fear. The more you avoid the things that might bring you failure, the more you shrink away from opportunities that could bring true growth. Isn't that ironic? The fear of failure is the thing that makes us fail to reach our potential. How much longer will you let this fear hold you back? What would happen if you embraced failure? Imagine the freedom you would feel if you no longer let failure control your actions. What if you saw every failure as an opportunity to refine your skills, adjust your approach, and keep going? How would that change your life? Would you be less afraid to take risks, to try new things, to leap into the unknown? Or will you continue to shrink in the shadow of failure, keeping yourself from discovering your true strength? It's time to challenge the fear of failure head-on. Stop letting it paralyze you. Understand that failure is not a reflection of your worth, but a stepping stone toward the life you want to build. The real failure is not trying at all. The real failure is living in constant fear of what might happen. If you want to grow, you have to be willing to fail. So I ask you now, what are you willing to fail at in order to truly succeed? Have you ever felt like you were running on empty, yet still pushing yourself to do more, to be more? How often do you collapse into bed at night, physically exhausted, but mentally wired, feeling like you didn't accomplish enough? This is the silent toll of perfectionism. The constant demand to be flawless drains you in ways you can't even see, leaving you fatigued, burnt out, and questioning whether the effort is even worth it. But why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we keep pushing even when our bodies and minds scream for rest? Perfectionism is not just a desire for excellence. It's a ruthless taskmaster, always demanding more, never satisfied with what's been achieved. The exhaustion comes not only from the work itself, but from the underlying anxiety that nothing will ever be enough. Have you ever thought, "I'll be happy when I finish this one last thing," only to find yourself setting new goals before the old ones are even fully accomplished? This constant cycle creates a deep fatigue that no amount of sleep can heal, leaving you caught in a never-ending race with no finish line in sight. What if you stopped? What would happen if you took a moment to step back and let go of the pressure to be perfect? Could it be that you'd find more peace, more clarity, and even more success in the long run? The pursuit of perfection isn't just draining your energy, it's draining your potential. You're so focused on meeting impossible standards that you're missing the opportunity to grow, learn, and evolve in ways that truly matter. Isn't it time to ask yourself, what would happen if you simply allowed yourself to be human? We live in a culture that glorifies hustle, productivity, and constant achievement. But at what cost? When was the last time you truly rested, not because you had to, but because you wanted to? The constant pressure to be perfect doesn't allow for real recovery. It leaves you in a perpetual state of burnout, and the worst part is, you don't even recognize it. The exhaustion becomes so normalized that you no longer question it. But deep down, you know something is off. You feel it in your bones, in your every thought, in your every decision. The real question is, when will you acknowledge it? This exhaustion isn't just physical, it's mental and emotional too. How many times have you tried to silence the voice in your head that tells you you're not doing enough? How often do you push past your limits, ignoring your own well-being in the name of productivity? This kind of fatigue creates a vicious cycle of self-doubt and frustration, leaving you questioning your worth based on how much you've accomplished. But why does your value depend on your ability to perform? Shouldn't you be enough as you are, imperfections and all? It's time to wake up to the fact that perfectionism is a slow poison to your well-being. You've been running a race with no finish line, and the toll is evident. The question is, how much longer are you willing to keep running until you break? Real success isn't about constant achievement or flawless performance. It's about finding balance, acknowledging your limits, and accepting that it's okay to rest. So I ask you, what would happen if you stopped trying to be perfect and instead just allowed yourself to be? Do you set impossibly high standards for the people around you? How often do you expect more from others than they are capable of giving, without realizing the damage it's causing? When we impose our perfectionistic expectations on others, we're not just striving for excellence, we're creating a toxic environment. Relationships are meant to nurture, not to serve as battlegrounds for unrealistically high standards. But how often do we confuse love with constant evaluation, turning every interaction into a test? Think about it. When was the last time you genuinely accepted someone for who they are, flaws and all? The truth is, perfectionism doesn't just harm us, it poisons the way we connect with others. We may think we're helping by pushing people to be better, but in reality, we're driving them away. Constant criticism, unrealistic expectations, and the pressure to be flawless creates a toxic dynamic. The very relationships we crave begin to crumble under the weight of our demands, and the people we love are left feeling inadequate, misunderstood, and even resentful. How many friendships, family bonds, or romantic relationships have been strained or broken because of perfectionism? When you expect others to meet impossible standards, you end up isolating yourself, leaving behind a trail of hurt. Why? Because perfectionism doesn't allow for vulnerability or authenticity. It demands that everyone around you be perfect too. And guess what? No one is. Not you. Not them. So why continue to enforce an unattainable ideal that's only going to lead to disappointment? Have you ever wondered how you might be unintentionally sabotaging your own happiness by holding people to such high standards? The more we expect perfection from others, the more we distance ourselves from true intimacy. Real relationships are messy. They're imperfect. They're filled with flaws, mistakes, and vulnerability. But when you demand perfection, you rob yourself of the opportunity to experience those raw, authentic connections that are the foundation of lasting bonds. Is being right more important than being close? The damage isn't just emotional. It's psychological. When others constantly feel they can't meet your standards, they begin to internalize that they're not enough. They feel inferior, inadequate, and eventually they start to pull away. The very relationships you cherish begin to feel like burdens. Burdens both you, and they are carrying without knowing how to unload them. What's the cost of trying to make everyone fit your mold of perfection? How many people do you risk losing because they just can't keep up with your ever-shifting expectations? Here's the harsh reality. Holding others to high standards doesn't create growth, it creates resentment. If you truly want meaningful, lasting relationships, it's time to ask yourself, what would happen if you accepted people as they are, imperfections and all? What would happen if you let go of the need to constantly evaluate and instead chose to love without conditions? Only then can you build the kind of relationships that bring joy and fulfillment instead of frustration and isolation. The question is, are you ready to let go of perfection and embrace real connection? Why do you feel the need to control everything around you? Is it because you're afraid of what might happen if you let go? The desire for control is one of the most toxic consequences of perfectionism. It's not just about wanting things to be right, it's about creating an illusion of security in a world that is constantly changing. But in your attempt to control the uncontrollable, are you actually surrendering your freedom? How much are you willing to lose just to feel in charge? It's easy to think that control is empowering, right? It feels good to be the one who's always in control. But what happens when you control everything? You become a prisoner to your own expectations, constantly striving to hold on to that illusion of order. The problem is, the more you try to control, the less you can actually influence. You start to lose yourself in the process, consumed by the fear that if you let go, everything will fall apart. Is it worth it? Or are you slowly destroying your own peace of mind? Ask yourself, how often do you feel anxious about what others are doing or the way things are turning out? Every time things don't go exactly as you planned, do you feel the urge to intervene, to fix, to adjust? It's a constant battle to maintain control, one that leaves you drained and empty. And yet, you keep fighting it. Why? Because in your mind, it's the only way to ensure that things stay in line with your vision of perfection. But at what cost? The truth is, control isn't the solution. It's the problem. You may think that controlling everything will prevent chaos, but in reality, it only creates more. The tighter you grip the reins, the more everything slips through your fingers. Relationships suffer because you're trying to control the way people behave. Your work suffers because you're obsessed with every minor detail. And most importantly, you suffer because you're constantly living in fear of what might go wrong if you don't maintain control. How long can you keep this up? What would happen if you just let go? What would happen if you embraced uncertainty, imperfection, and the natural flow of life? Letting go of control doesn't mean giving up. It means accepting that there's only so much you can do. It means trusting in the process and in yourself, knowing that life will unfold as it's meant to. Control is a false sense of security, an illusion that traps you in a never-ending cycle of stress and frustration. Could it be time to let go and experience what true freedom feels like? The paradox here is brutal. The more you try to control, the less free you become. You become a slave to your own expectations, your own rigid standards, and your own fears. Freedom is found in letting go, not in holding on tighter. So, I ask you, what would happen if you let go of control? What would happen if you stopped trying to shape every moment to fit your perfect vision? Would you feel relief, peace, and a sense of freedom you've never known before? The answer might be terrifying, but it could also be the key to unlocking a life you've been chasing in all the wrong ways. What if the thing that's holding you back from living your fullest life is the very idea of perfection? It's a dangerous illusion, isn't it? We've all been taught that success, happiness, and fulfillment come from achieving the highest possible standards. But what if the pursuit of perfection is the very thing preventing us from experiencing true joy and freedom? It's time to face a harsh truth. The more you chase perfection, the more trapped you become. Can you see it? Are you ready to face the fact that it's this endless pursuit that's destroying your peace? Imagine letting go of the need to be perfect. What would it feel like to wake up and know that it's okay to make mistakes? What would happen if you stopped judging yourself so harshly? The truth is, perfection doesn't exist. It's a mirage in the distance, a goal that can never truly be reached. So why are you still chasing it? Why do you continue to put yourself through the torment of measuring yourself against an impossible standard? Ask yourself, what are you really afraid of? The constant need to be perfect is suffocating, isn't it? It consumes you. Every moment is spent second-guessing your actions, worrying about how you're being perceived, and trying to maintain an image that doesn't even exist. You've been told that to succeed, you must excel in every area of life. But what happens when you're striving to be everything at once? You end up exhausted, unfulfilled, and disconnected from who you truly are. Could this endless pressure be the reason you feel so disconnected from your own life? Letting go of perfection isn't about lowering your standards or giving up on your goals. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of unrealistic expectations. It's about accepting that progress, not perfection, is what truly matters. By releasing the grip on perfection, you allow yourself the freedom to grow, to learn from mistakes, and to be human. Isn't that what life is all about? Why not embrace the messy, imperfect journey instead of fearing it? You deserve to experience life as it is, raw, real, and beautifully imperfect. Perfectionism keeps you stuck in a constant state of anxiety and dissatisfaction. But what if you could break free? What if you could step into a world where mistakes aren't failures, but opportunities for growth? The key to unlocking a life of freedom and happiness is found in letting go. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy, to be loved, or to be successful. In fact, it's your imperfections that make you authentic, relatable, and real. Can you imagine the peace that would come from accepting yourself as you are? Now take a moment to reflect. What would it feel like to finally let go of the pressure? To stop chasing a version of yourself that doesn't even exist? It's time to stop living for perfection and start living for freedom. It's time to embrace the chaos, the mistakes, and the flaws, because that's where true growth happens. So, are you ready to step into the unknown, release the need for control, and live a life that's perfectly imperfect? The choice is yours, but know this, freedom is waiting on the other side. If this resonated with you, if you felt the weight of these truths, then you know it's time to change the game. Subscribe now. Here, power speaks in silence.